Hello, my name is Eric, and welcome to this week's video lesson. Today we're going to look at flooding, the consequences. So today's topic is taken from Unit 7.5 in your book. That's page 100 and 101. But before we look at your book, look at this picture. Imagine there is a flood 1.5 meters deep in the room you are in. Even if you live on the 10th floor, imagine the room you are in has a flood that's 1.5 meters deep. Look around you. What things in the room you're in would be damaged or destroyed? Now, imagine this is your house. This is a much deeper flood. What would be damaged or destroyed in a house like this? Pretty much everything, right? Now, imagine a big flood is coming. All of your family is safe. Your wallet and your phone are already in your pocket. You don't have to worry about them. But you can only save 3 more items from your home. What would you choose and why? So think quickly before the flood waters rise. Okay, I have my items. First one I would choose is my dog, because I love my dog. Second one I would choose is my passport. It might be very, very important if I can't live here anymore. And third thing I would choose is my laptop, which is in front of me recording right now, so I can't show it. I need my laptop for a lot of things. There's a lot of things saved on it. It's important for work and also for my free time activities. So what about you? What did you choose and why? Okay, let's look at our goals for today. Today we want to understand how floods affect individual people, society, and the economy. We want to know and be able to classify the consequences as either personal, local, or national. We also want to know and to be able to classify consequences as emotional, financial, or social. So, in your book on page 100, Flooding the Consequences. So the book looks at an example of a flood in the UK in 2007. This flood affected many places in the summer of 2007, and the biggest places are shown on the map, and they are marked with a red dot. So when we're talking about consequences, we mean the results or the effects. So how did the flood affect the people living in these places? Well, first of all, 10 people died, either by drowning or in flood-related incidents. To drown means to die from being submerged or put underwater. So you cannot breathe oxygen, you breathe in the water, and you die. Many thousands of homes and businesses were damaged by floodwater. Roads, railway lines, and bridges needed to be repaired. Many farms lost animals and crops to the floods, and the cost of damage was around £6 billion. These photographs are not necessarily taken from this flood, but here we can see an example of flood damage. So the flood has washed away the soil and washed away the road, and the building has collapsed. This is an example of farm animals that have drowned in a flood, and crops that have been destroyed by the flood. So continuing with the consequences, The problems caused by flooding don't stop when the water goes away. The 2007 floods, for example, had serious consequences for the people in the flooded areas, but also for everyone else in the UK. So on the next page, we'll look at some examples. Before we do, let's see, could they happen again? Scientists predict worse storms and floods in the UK in the future due to global warming. And that's grim news. Grim here means bad news, unhappy news, something we don't want. We need to be prepared, and in the next unit, you'll read about ways to protect ourselves from floods. But the trouble is, lots of our cities, towns, and villages, and much of our infrastructure means the physical structures that keep a place functioning. Railways, roads, power stations, water treatment plants, sewage works, and so on, they're all built in floodplains, and protecting them will cost billions of pounds. If the government has to spend all that money fighting floods, it could mean less money for schools, hospitals, fighting crime. Or people will have to pay more taxes. So hard choices will have to be made. So here are some of the consequences from the floods. First one we have here is grief. When a person dies, it can take a family many years to recover. They may never recover. So grief is a feeling of deep sadness over the loss of a loved one. Stress. It can be very stressful cleaning up after the flood, trying to get everything back to normal. Lost forever, people will lose precious things that they can never replace. For example, old family photos. Crops get destroyed by the flood. So thousands of acres of crops were flooded and they rotted in the water. Potatoes, broccoli, carrots, peas, wheat. Farmers lost a fortune. And this caused a rise in food prices. So when the crops are destroyed, that means there's less on the market to sell. So when we have less of an item to sell and more people want it, that drives the price up. Also, the farmers have to increase the price to make back some of the money that they lost. So even for people not living in the flooded area, they will be affected because the crops come from that area. So there's less food for them, and the food that is available becomes more expensive. Tourism goes down. So tourists, of course, they don't want to or they can't visit a flooded place. So if an area relies on tourism, they will lose a lot of money. Other businesses also lose out. Shops, offices, pubs, cinemas, they all close down during a flood, so they lose a lot of money also. Insurance premiums go up. Premiums is the money that we pay to insurance companies. It's the fees we pay for them to insure something. So the floods cost your insurance companies £3 billion. So they have to increase their premiums to make back some of that money. Government money is down. The floods cost the government billions of pounds, so it had less money to spend on other things. So in this picture, we can see the government has to decide where they're going to spend their money. They have to spend it on things like schools, hospitals, railways, the police. If they have to spend it on flood defense, then there's less money for the other things. And there's a greater demand for flood defenses. So places at risk of flooding, they want this money to build those flood defenses. To pay for them, the people in the country have to pay more tax. And we also have conflict. Conflict is a serious disagreement, one that usually goes on for a long time. So the conflict here we're talking about is where we're going to build the houses. So the experts say we have to stop building on the floodplains, but where will the new homes go? We already have many cities in the floodplains, so people want to live near those cities. So there's a demand for houses in those places, but those places are at risk of flooding. So there's conflict about where we should build new homes. So in your notebook, question 1, look at the flooded places on this map again. All of these places are built on floodplains. Why are so many settlements built on floodplains? So pause the video, write your answer, and then we'll check. Okay, your answer should be similar to this. The early settlers chose sites with flat land for farming and that were near rivers. They needed the rivers to use as a source of water, food, and transport. So these sites are on floodplains. Later, some of the rivers were used in industry. So thanks to their location near rivers, these settlements grew into large towns and cities. Now in your notebook, you're going to draw a table like this. So in the first column, you'll have a list of the consequences. So we have grief, stress, loss of precious items, crops lost, rise in food prices, rise in insurance premiums, tourism down, other business losses, government money down, demand for flood defences, and conflict about where to build. Now across the top row, we're going to decide if these are personal. So if the consequence only affects the people who were flooded and also their families. We'll decide if they're local, if they affect all of the area that was flooded. Or national, that means affecting the whole country, even places that weren't flooded. Then we also want to decide if they are emotional consequences. Do they affect the way people feel? Are they social? Do they affect the way people live? Or economic? Do they affect money, earning, and spending? So for each consequence, you're going to put a tick in the table for either personal, local, or national, and then a second tick for either emotional, social, or economic. So each consequence should have 2 ticks. So I'll do an example first, grief. So grief is a feeling of deep sadness because somebody you love has died. So grief is a personal consequence. It affects the people who knew that person. It's also emotional. It's dealing with our feelings. So pause the video, make sure you copy this table, and put 2 ticks for each consequence. When you've finished, we will check. Okay, if you've finished, let's check all of your answers. Stress. Stress is affecting just the people who were hit by the flood. It's personal. Stress is also an emotion. Loss of precious items. So if you lose something that's very important to you and that you cannot replace, this is, again, a personal consequence. It's not affecting everybody in the area. It's not affecting everybody in the country. Each person, each individual will have their own personal, precious item that they may lose. Now, is this emotional, social, or economic? Well, this really depends on what the item is. Precious can mean something that's valuable or important to you, or it can mean it has money value. In my example, I'm going to go with something that is just important to me, perhaps something that my grandparents gave me that I cannot replace. It might not have any money value, but it has emotional value to me. But if you ticked economic, that's okay, because precious has different meanings. Crops lost. Well, this is national. The crops we grow in a place are used to feed a whole country. So when those crops are lost, they're lost for everybody in the country. It's national. And it's economic. When the crops are lost, the farmers lose a lot of money. And a subsequent consequence of that is the rise in food prices. Again, this is national. The crops are to feed the whole country, so the price of crops increases all over the country. We may have to import crops from other countries, which is more expensive. And of course, prices, we're talking about economic. Rise in insurance premiums. Well, the insurance companies are working to insure people all over the country. So they will raise their prices for everybody. And premiums are money that we pay to the insurance companies. So again, this is economic. Tourism down. Well, this will affect the local area that was flooded. It doesn't affect the whole country. Some places that are not flooded will not be affected. And this is economic. Tourism is a big industry. It makes a lot of money for places. So if tourists stop coming, they lose a lot of money. Other business losses. Again, this is only happening in the area that's affected by the flood. So this is local. And of course, business is about economics. Government money down. So the government has money to spend for the whole country. So this is national. And again, we're talking about money, so it's economic. Demand for flood defenses. Now this is national. Of course, the flooded area will demand it, but any other place, even if they're not flooded right now, if they are at risk of flooding, they will also demand flood defenses. So this is affecting the whole country. And this is economic. Flood defenses cost a lot of money. Conflict about where to build. This is national. So we have to plan where to build new houses all over a country, not just in one local area. So this conflict is nationwide. And conflict is social. So different people will have different views, and it affects them in different ways. It's a social consequence. So let's review the points from today. Flooding affects large communities because many towns and cities developed on floodplains to take advantage of the good flat land and the natural resources of the river. There are many consequences to flooding. Some affect individuals, some affect whole communities, and others affect the whole country. The consequences can be classed as emotional, social, and economic. The economic effects can be great due to damage to homes, infrastructure, and business losses. When governments have to spend a lot of money to repair flood damage, there's less money available for other services. So that's the end of today's lesson. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye and have a nice day.